All right, welcome to the Simpleton podcast. I'm here with Chad Pirotte. Chad, how you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks, Clark.
All right, Chad and I only recently met, but we have a bunch of 1 degree of separation, a bunch of friends in common. And we met when I went over to your house a week ago or 2 weeks ago to smoke pipes.
That's correct.
Now, I want to ask you about smoking pipes. And this, I felt like that was pretty cool being at your house because it's kind of like a French salon of exchange of ideas while we're looking philosophical, smoking pipes.
That's right.
Is that what you're going for with that?
I am going for I don't know about a French salon because I've never been to a French salon, but I am definitely going for an, Inklings kind of Oxford study where some people can freely share ideas and go deep and not have to worry about censorship.
So it's not designed where we're supposed to like cry on each other's shoulders and hug each other.
No, definitely not. It's much more philosophical, idea level, talking about problems and solutions and depths and complexities of the world.
Well, I'll know not to cry next time, and that was a little bit inappropriate, I guess. But, so Chad, just for the listeners, this is our first interview in a minute. Chad was a Protestant pastor. I don't even know the denomination, so I got to get filled in on all that.
Presbyterian pastor.
A Catholic catechist. And now you, like Jesus and St. Joseph, are a carpenter.
That's correct.
And you have your own ministry called Grounded Catholic.
That is correct. Yes.
Okay. So I want to do that because I feel like this can be our version of EWTN's Journey Home.
All right. Sounds good.
By the way, was that show formative for you or helpful for you?
No, I've watched maybe 1.5 episodes, and the one episode that I watched was a friend of mine. So
okay, good. All right.
That's about it. They did reach out, and actually, I mean, I have my utmost respect for EWTN's Journey Home, but I just didn't use them. Yeah.
Right. I find what you just said about the utmost respect, I have like a respect-hate relationship with EWTN where it's like, I so much respect what they've pulled off there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I've heard that the bishops were trying to start a TV station before Mother Angelica. So she succeeded where the bishops failed. Yeah. And I just love all that. And yet when I watch it, I'm like, oh no, this is just not for me.
Yeah. It's kind of like the church. It's like, how in the world has this thing succeeded and been going on for so long, but somehow it has.
Right. Well, we'll do our own Journey Home, the Simpleton version of Journey Home. All right. So when did you get into smoking pipes?
Well, I smoked cigars for a long time before pipes, and I've owned a pipe since college, but never really smoked it all that much, but did smoke a lot of cigars. And then actually during COVID, I lost my job right before COVID and had a couple of pipes and realized, and then I also had kids and realized like smoking a cigar takes 45 minutes and I get interrupted and I never get through it. And you can smoke a pipe and it's far cheaper and just as smooth and maybe even better. And so it just kind of transitioned during COVID and I became addicted.
It is amazingly cheap.
It is.
Like, yeah. I mean, I got my first pipe in college also. You didn't go to KU, did you?
No, I went to Kansas State University.
Okay, great. Well,
did you go to KU?
I did.
Okay.
And back in the 90s at KU, the main drag's like Mass Street, right? Yep. And there was a little shop on Mass Street that was only open occasionally. And you knew they were open when they would drag out a big wooden Indian that holds cigars.
Oh, yeah. I know that tobacco store, yeah.
Oh, you do?
I haven't been in there, but I know exactly, yeah.
It doesn't still exist, though, right?
I don't know, but I mean, I grew up in Olathe. My brother went to KU. My dad went to KU, so I've been to Lawrence enough.
All right. Yeah. So there were 2 guys in there who were retired, and they only opened the store when they felt like it. So 4 hours a couple times a week was about its whole thing, you know? And they were pipe evangelists, right? And they would like convince women, like sorority girls who walk in, to start smoking a pipe. Like they were really good at being pipe evangelists. And they got me to buy. So I'm bringing this up because you're smoking the same type of pipe, the Peterson. Yeah. And they told me, because I was looking to buy my first one, and they told me, they go, you would never be able to afford this pipe if it wasn't a second, and you need to buy this pipe. And so I spent like $40 on it, which was like a lot of money to me in the 90s, you know?
Yeah.
But I still have it today. So 25 years plus later. Yeah.
Yeah. You gotta keep your first pipe. That's awesome.
Right.
Yeah. So why do you, what attracts, my nature is to ask questions. So I apologize. I'm taking the interviewing. But why do you enjoy smoking? What is it about it?
I only smoke for the health benefits.
Yeah.
And
so do I.
and our sponsor's Big Tobacco here on the Simpleton podcast.
Oh yeah,
I'm just
there
kidding.
You go.
No, actually, there's almost no big tobacco involved in pipe smoking. It's almost all small business.
Yeah.
Which is
makes
great.
it even better. Yeah.
Yeah, it does, right? I like it. I actually, the setting in which I met you, which is this kind of a pipe smoking type club type setting, that's not my favorite way to smoke. My favorite way is it's 2:00 in the afternoon. I don't want to do anything. I'm kind of dead on my feet and I need to go be productive. And if I smoke a pipe, I will just go do chores. Like it really energizes me. So the reason why I don't like to smoke it like late in the evening is because like I don't want to go to bed afterwards. I'm like ready to roll, you know?
Yeah.
Do you smoke it while you work as a carpenter?
No, I don't. I only smoke it when I'm sitting down and really doing nothing or reading.
Right.
I can't, it's just like more my contemplative, and 2 in the afternoon. Yeah. When I get home, I usually get home around, 3:30 or 4. The ideal afternoon is really I get home and I take a half hour and just go smoke a pipe and debrief and think about whatever it is that I'm thinking about. Pray. Well, I mean, it's certainly a contemplative element to life.
It makes you feel more philosophical, even if you just put it in your mouth unlit, you know?
That's right. That's very true. So for health benefits, my one joke, it's not really a joke, is that the Surgeon General back in the 1960s or 1970s did a data analysis, and those who smoke 2 bowls of tobacco a day actually live longer than people who don't smoke anything at all.
Is that real?
That was a real data back in the 1960s.
Oh, 60s.
And, yeah. But I'm convinced still that people who smoke are healthier, smoke pipe in particular, because it makes you slow down and it makes you just reflect a little bit. It's like having a bourbon or a glass of wine at the end of the day. It's actually a good habit, in my opinion. And of course I do it. So of course it's a good habit, but yeah.
Well, it does actually prevent, it decreases the likelihood of Parkinson's. And this other thing was, I asked my cardiologist, I go, is smoking bad or is nicotine bad? And he goes, smoking. Smoking's the bad part. He said nicotine's not the bad part. So if you're going to smoke, I think pipe's the way to do it. But whatever, I don't feel like, I'm a little bit afraid of our audience feeling like we're pipe evangelizing on our podcast now. But all right, so let's talk more seriously. All right. So if you were a Protestant pastor and became Catholic, I feel like you've almost had 2 conversions, right? What first made you start taking Christ, God, Christianity so seriously as to want to become a Protestant pastor?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot to that, obviously. I was raised in an evangelical home, 2 parents that were alive and awakened to the faith and lived it out in a serious manner. And I had a church that I grew up in that was just a fantastic community of people living together in community, but also doing everything together in mission, in vacations, in We would do mission trips. We would do service trips. We would go down to the homeless shelter. I mean, we did everything together.
What type of denomination was it?
That was a Presbyterian church as well, growing up. And it actually wasn't my intention to become a Presbyterian pastor, but that cultivated a spirit within me that was very warm to religion and spirituality and divine things in the Christian realm. And then at age 18, I had this huge just epiphany and interior awakening that I really can't explain other than just it being a supernatural, conversion, awakening to Christianity in a very existential and personal way. Whereas before it was just kind of like I was in this community and I was involved because it was a part of my friendships and all of everybody who I knew. Now it was a very personal conviction. And then I went to college and just continued to grow deeper in that conviction through a ministry called the Navigators, which, a number of individuals in that ministry and organization were hugely influential, and decided from there that I really wanted to go to seminary and study further. And I didn't have any idea of necessarily being a pastor, but I wanted to go to seminary because that in the evangelical world, like that's kind of the bridge to a lot of different things. You can go into ministry, you can go into academia, but that's kind of the path you take. And so I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to do that next. So I did that and realized I wasn't cut out for academia, and I didn't necessarily like it. It kind of burned me out, but I loved helping lay people go deeper in their faith through smoking pipes. And so I thought that was the best way to do it, is become a pastor. No, but yeah, I love that. And I still love that. And there's really nothing more that excites me even today than seeing lay people awakened to deeper realities.
Would you say that you were kind of evangelical during this whole period, or was there a point where I kind of feel like I've met some Protestant friends who discover kind of Reformed theology. So in a way, they're kind of more than evangelical. Now they have a little bit of a superstructure over it, this Reformed theology.
Yeah. So I was absolutely Reformed in every realm. In college, I was a history major and took a Reformation class, a history of Reformation, that awakened me to Calvin. And that was really like a second conversion. A lot of evangelicals who are Reformed will talk about a second conversion, which is kind of like this understanding of grace in a different way. And that was my second conversion. And then I'd say my third conversion was to Catholicism. But so here, for Catholics who don't know what I'm talking about or what you're talking about when you say Reformed, I mean, really, there's the evangelical, which is kind of we'll just call it the Simpleton congregational, non-denominational church community, which is good. But then kind of, so in Catholicism, you have a whole the church can be a whole civilization. It's shaping the whole civilization. Calvinism kind of has that mentality of wanting to shape civilization on every level, but it's not Catholic, and it's not to the degree of Catholicism, but it has that aura about it.
Can I test this idea against what you're saying? So
sure.
I have a friend growing up, my best friend growing up, met a girl in high school whose dad was an evangelical pastor, right? And he became evangelical, ended up marrying this girl, right? And then after years of doing Simple House, I had dinner with him back down in Dallas, or lunch, and he said, I was tired of being in a church that was founded in 1982. Mm-hmm. I'm becoming Presbyterian.
Okay.
Right? And I was kind of okay, so now your church is founded in 1552 or something. I'm not sure exactly when, but somewhere in there, right? All right. Yeah. But I could tell that things were connecting in his mind. what before had never had, like, I almost feel like evangelical Protestantism doesn't have theology. Like, it doesn't have like a logical superstructure over scripture. It's just like scripture. Right.
Yep,
and then once you get, and so this Reformed theology is in a sense like feels like almost a whole step closer to Catholicism, because it's like the first time you're actually using like the philosophical tool set within your religion. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I mean, yeah, for sure.
Okay, so you graduate and become
elaborate?
You can elaborate. Yeah, go. Yeah.
No, I mean, I do think that's fair. No, actually, that's fair. That's all I'll say on that. That's a fair explanation. And it is, yeah, it's very bibliocentric. And when you get out of the scriptural world, that's when it becomes a problem, because once you find loopholes, hermeneutics for how to interpret scripture in ways that scripture was never saying, well, then it becomes a problem. And you need some type of philosophical system outside of that to really guide it, so to speak, which is interesting to say. The way I see it is this, the way I explain it is this. Imagine the United States without a Supreme Court. Okay, that's the evangelical world.
Right.
The Catholic world has a Supreme Court, and whenever there are any intersections of tension and friction, eventually, if it gets up to the Supreme Court will make a decision. And there's order and heritage and history and tradition all embedded in the Supreme Court, and that's the magisterium to me. So that's the difference.
I think that's a powerful analogy that I've never heard expressed. I want to ask you more questions about this, but I want to like kind of get you through your story before I mine this much deeper. But can I ask one more? So, JP2 wrote an encyclical. I think I'm citing the right thing here, but I think it's Fideas et Ratio, or I don't know Latin, so whatever.
Yeah.
But my takeaway from this encyclical was that what theology is philosophy with revealed truth as a starting point. You know, like whatever philosophical tool set, you put that with scripture or sacred tradition, now you have theology, right? And I think it could be true to say, and I do not mean this as an insult whatsoever, that like certain Christian groups kind of just don't have theology. Meaning like they're just not attempting to use the philosophical tool set on scripture. They're only trying to mine scripture directly. Does that seem fair to you?
That does seem fair. Now here, and I would agree with that, especially the caveat of certain evangelical sects, we'll call that. I would say that most evangelical, even non-denominational, are in some ways a part of the neo-reformed circle. So even if they're not connected to Presbyterian or the Christian Reformed Church, like they do have a Reformed theology.
Well, yeah, you can't get away from it, right? Even if you try not to be theological, you'll end up believing in the Trinity or something,
right?
Which isn't expressly in Scripture,
right? But my point being that there are a lot of evangelicals who have completely engaged in theology, and they might not acknowledge the philosophical component that we as Catholics fully acknowledge, but they're fully entering into that philosophical component when they embrace a system of thought.
So you have your first conversion, then your second conversion, and now you're becoming what you described to us. You wanted to be a pastor. Is that right?
Yeah.
So how did that?
Oh, yeah.
Well, you said you wanted to wake up lay people.
Yeah. Or just help them along the way. I mean, there is so much to Christianity beyond just simply a simple conversion. And I don't even know what I mean by that. But, as Catholics, we would say there's deeper interior conversion, constant deeper interior conversion. And what does that mean? Well, generally, in my experience, that's led by two different things. It's led by a conscience that's I'm being more awakened to sin in my own life, and I need to shed that sin. And so that's kind of a deeper interior conversion of just becoming more and more holy. But that also comes on through ideas that are forming my conscience and forming my idea and understanding of who God is. So, like if I thought for years that I earned my own salvation, and then I come to an epiphany that actually it was God who gave me grace and I didn't earn a dang thing, like that's a world changer if I really embrace that and understand what that means. And that's what I mean. Like, there's these two aspects: to convict of deeper sin and to convict of deeper understanding of who God is. And I love both of those things.
So what did you do in this period of life now that you've gone to seminary?
So when I was in seminary, I just literally studied a ton and had some great friends in seminary. And my second year in seminary, I got involved in a church that I'm a hands-on guy. I'm a choleric from day one. And so like, I really believe that you got to just jump in. So I got involved, interestingly, in a Korean-American immigrant, not an immigrant setting, but a second-generation Korean-American church, which was a completely new concept to me. Like, it's first time as a white dude from Kansas who went to Kansas State, who's 80% farming, like gets involved in this other world, so to speak, that exists in the United States. And so I got involved and was completely fascinated with, this world, and somehow they embraced me. And the reason that the providential aspect was this second generation church was growing in downtown Chicago, of all mostly Korean Americans, and they had about 10% white people coming in. And the pastor was like, I have no idea what is going on. Why are these white people coming into my church? And so he wanted some type of staff person who understood both Korean and, American Caucasian worldview. And I had a year that I spent in an immigrant church, in the Korean immigrant church. And he's like, hey, would you be interested in coming here? And so I went there and got involved. And that was the church that I became ordained in. And I was there for 10 years until I became Catholic.
Wow. Do you still have like Korean things you're holding on to? Like you eat a lot of kimchi or something, or? No,
I do love kimchi, but I don't make it, and I certainly don't put it in my refrigerator. No, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it's a long story, but I ended up marrying a Taiwanese American. And long story short, but it does have to do with my conversion. So we got married in 2006, and then in 2012 she passed away from a rheumatoid arthritis, which turned into a lung disease. And so I have two daughters that are half Taiwanese, and so certainly there's a part of me that's always and permanently going to be connected to the Asian world through them.
Wow. So that's pretty heavy. I was about ready to say something kind of light. So last week,
I can laugh now, but 10 years ago I couldn't.
Right. I'm sorry, man. That's kind
right.
of. By the way, was she ethnically Chinese or ethnically Taiwanese? She
was Taiwanese, and her
which
family
is a minority of people on the island, is my understanding.
Oh, I see. I don't know. I'm pretty sure her parents' generations are Taiwanese. Like they've been there a number of years. So I don't know if they ever migrated over or what, but they would consider themselves Taiwanese, and they are completely anti-China in every way possible.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. My understanding was that when communism took over China, the regime that was in China fled to Taiwan.
Okay.
Like the more traditional regime. And a lot of Chinese live in Taiwan, but they are part of they're very patriotically Taiwanese, but they're in fact not the natives of Taiwan.
Gotcha.
And the natives are like a minority.
Yeah. That's interesting. I don't know the family history of them. I'm pretty sure her dad's side has a number of generations in Taiwan, but I'm not sure about her mom's side.
I feel like they might then be Taiwanese, just guessing, just because I feel like there'd be stories of coming over from China if they were part of that migration when Mao was taken over.
Yeah.
All right. So now you're at this church, and you also have something very big happening in your personal life, the loss of a wife, right? So when are you converting to Catholicism? This whole time
I'm converting, really starting in seminary. I'd say it was a 10-year developing of an iceberg that I didn't know was developing. And then when my wife died, there was a number of just things of questions, particularly suffering, which I didn't have an answer for, and my system, my church tradition, what little there was, didn't have necessarily an answer for it. And so one aspect is journeying into the Catholic Church, there is this fantastic understanding of suffering, redemptive suffering that is just unparalleled in any other Christian realm. And much like your friend who said, I just couldn't be a part of a church that was created in the 1980s anymore, or whatever. There's a article written by a prominent evangelical named Scott McKnight, who writes on Catholic conversion. So evangelicals converting to Catholicism. And one of the things he writes about was that almost all of them have experienced trauma in some way. And that trauma then leads to this gaping hole of needing to be connected to a heritage that's deeper than just their superficial heritage. So when I experience pain, I want to be able to go to a realm of a community that has also experienced pain. And that community happens to be the Catholic Church. You can go to any saint and find deep community of suffering. Anyway, he talks about a number of things, but I was just drawn. I was drawn to that need to suffer with a community of people.
Is there something in it where maybe certain parts of Christianity celebrate too much kind of the I'm trying not to use the word prosperity gospel, but as you because I feel like that word's totally abused, but as you start to follow Christ, things do start working well, usually. If you start living a moral life, if you do this,
sure,
there is this reward for following Christ. It's often also an earthly reward,
sure,
right? Is there a sense in which they're focusing a lot on that and they're not acknowledging some people's lives kind of suck, or sometimes your life is really going to suck, and kind of dealing with that aspect?
I don't know. I hear a lot of Catholics harping on that. That wasn't my experience actually in the evangelical world, and I feel like the evangelical people that push forward the prosperity gospel, like the Joel Osteens, really it's more of a Southern evangelical Bible Belt theology, but also coming out of that a much more African American kind of theology, which again, it makes sense coming when you see what they're coming out of, the experiences that they're coming out of, right? So it wasn't my experience with that.
So they're really not denying that pain is a big part of the Christian life. It is about this community aspect that you're saying.
Yeah, I didn't experience any denying of suffering in that sense, but for some reason theologically there isn't a real developed theology of it, and so theologically I was just drawn deeply into the Catholic understanding of suffering.
And were there certain books or thinkers that were really moving you here?
So this is interesting. Starting out, there was a debate when I was in seminary on imputed theology or imputed righteousness versus infused righteousness. And this was in the evangelical world. I don't want to take a ton of time to explain this, but it was between N.T. Wright, who is an Anglican bishop, and John Piper, who's this Baptist pastor. They're both very theological, but I found myself siding much more in scripture and theologically with N.T. Wright, who preached infused theology. Well, what is infused theology? Well, Catholics believe in infused theology, essentially, which led to the doctrine of theosis, which then drew me into that. And Orthodox Church really, and the Catholic Church really believes in theosis, the idea of becoming divine, becoming one with God in holiness.
Can you talk more about what you mean when you say infused theology?
Yeah, so the way I explain it is like, from a Lutheran perspective or an evangelical perspective, for the most part, when we believe in Jesus, like the clothing that I have on right now, let's just pretend this is me. Jesus robes us. He puts his own robe on us. And so that when God the Father looks at us on Judgment Day, he sees Jesus's garment, and therefore we are admitted into heaven. However, what that doesn't do is it doesn't actually change internally who I am. It's just, it's transferred over to me, but it doesn't change me. That's imputed righteousness. Whereas infused righteousness is not only does he give me his garment, but that garment then becomes, it literally, weaves into and becomes me, so that I actually take on the nature of Christ. And here's the thing, is that I think lots and lots and lots of evangelicals actually believe in infused righteousness, but they don't admit it or they don't know it. And once they see the distinction and they realize they believe in infused righteousness, I really believe that there's no way they can turn back and continue to stay in an evangelical realm. That's my opinion. It's so connected to Catholicism. And there's another prominent evangelical by the name of Hank Hanegraaff, who was the Bible answer man. He had millions of followers on the radio, and he became Orthodox just a few years ago because of the same path, the same trajectory. Anyway.
Wow. I don't have a good follow-up question to that, Chad.
Okay, so let me just keep talking then. So infused theology was huge, and that was all within the evangelical realm. Like, I was not reading any Catholic theologians or scholars at all. And however, I was reading a guy by the name of Christian Smith, who is a sociologist at Notre Dame. And I read there's probably 5 books of his that I've read as an evangelical, because I thought that his sociological work on the American church was fantastic. And so, fast forward to 2012, like I'm struggling through this. Well, there's one other big component. My Presbyterian denomination in 2010, roughly around there, they decided to embrace practicing homosexuality. Practicing homosexuals could be ordained as pastors. Okay, and that was like a huge deal. It had been debated for years prior to that, and it had always been voted down in the Presbyterian synods. But this year, it was accepted. And so my particular church had kind of a crisis identity moment of, okay, do we really want to go on this trajectory, or do we want to, what are our choices? And so we ultimately decided to break away from the Presbyterian denomination we were part of, which meant that the 3 pastors that were at our church, I was one of them, reneged our ordination in that denomination and moved elsewhere.
What does an ordination mean, like in a denomination like that? Because it means something in Catholicism that is maybe different.
Yeah.
How is it different than just being employed, say?
Well, it is still a calling, and it is still an invitation. So, I mean, you can't just be ordained. In the Presbyterian Church, I mean, you have to go through seminary. And not only that, but you have to go through 2.5 years underneath the presbytery's arm. So you have a mentor pastor who interviews you. You go through psychological examinations. You go through testing, big, huge. I mean, I did kind of like PhD level examinations. And then you have to have a presbytery embrace you. A presbytery is just pastors of the local church in the region. So you might have 40 Presbyterian pastors, and they all have to say, nope, this guy's fit for ministry. We're going to call him in. And then you have to have another church actually invite you to become their pastor. So all of that is involved in the ordination process. And it's bigger than just simply, hey, I want to become a pastor. Hey, will someone hire me? There's quite a bit to it, but it's not like a lifelong. It's supposed to be a lifelong commitment, but it's obviously different than the Catholic Church just because of the holy orders.
So you then split from the bigger congregation, and when you're doing that, are you thinking, hey, now we're a congregation of one church, or are you joining some other group, or what?
So that's where we were discerning, like, should we join another group? Should we become our own, one just single congregation, or should we join other groups? And ultimately, I think the church did join another group, but I wasn't a part of that because I left. So back to Christian Smith. I'm reading him. My wife dies. The church was incredibly gracious to me. I was smoking. I realized after about 6 months after my wife died, I was still part of the church. And realized that I had 2 daughters at the time. So I had a 3-year-old and a 6-month-old when my wife died.
Wow.
And realized I needed to go back home. I needed to come back home to Kansas. My mom and dad were here, and my mom ran a daycare. She could watch the kids. I just needed to get away and be able to discern. There's something to say for discerning outside of the context that you're in, just to be able to step out. So I needed that, and I did. And I was reading, so the day that I resigned, I was reading Christian Smith on my Kindle. I went to a cigar bar to smoke a cigar, just to bring it back to holy smoke. And my Kindle brought up Christian Smith's new book, which was entitled How to Go from Being a Good Evangelical to a Committed Catholic in 95 Difficult Steps. And I said, oh, it was 99 cents. So I have 50 minutes at least to go through this cigar. So I just purchased the book and started reading it. And lo and behold, it was Christian Smith, of all people, a sociologist in Notre Dame, who really, I wouldn't say made me become Catholic, but he was the final straw that really got me to begin to think that way.
Did you buy that book because you did kind of want to be Catholic, or did you buy that book because you were going to refute it?
I've never been asked that question. No, it certainly wasn't refute. So it was more just open. I was open, and I really admired the author. And so the fact that he had become Catholic, and I really admired his thinking, I was curious.
This is kind of a different intellectual journey than I've ever heard anyone try to explain to me before.
Yeah, it is. It is a different.
Yeah, and I don't know Christian Smith, but now I kind of want to get some of his key works or something like that and just look them over, now that you're saying all this.
Well, in terms of youth and religiosity in America, I think he's probably the top scholar in America on that.
How did you go from Protestant pastor converting and then somehow getting good enough, fast enough at Catholic theology that you're now like a catechist? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Was that 10 minutes later you're a catechist? Because
no, that's a very interesting question. I think it's all providential. So this is a funny story.
Just so people know, it's not like you were running CCD. I mean, you were a full-time, 2-adult Catholic education person. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So on the night I had dabbled into the Catholic Mass for, 3 months. And then the RCIA invitation came, and I was like, okay, maybe I need to do this RCIA thing. And the night before, I was reading. Every evangelical gets stuck on Marian theology. I'm not. I'm the same. I was stuck on Marian theology. Of all the theological things, like that really is the only thing I was stuck on for the most part. So I was reading this book edited by Scott Hahn and it's co-edited, another author. And this was the night before RCA, and I'm reading through this and thinking through, and I just said, Lord, as I go to this RCA tomorrow, would you please provide for me someone who is intellectually engaging where I can have a conversation with them? Like, not to insult anybody, but Catholic culture in many realms, like not so deep in the theological realm for the questions that I needed. So anyway, I go to RCA first night.
So the odds are really against you. Just say it. Like, I've been in a lot of RCIA classrooms and finding this person. I was getting ready to ask if you were going to be disappointed at RCIA, but so you pray that you're going to have the right RCIA, right?
Yeah.
So what happened?
The first guy, I cannot make this up. First guy I meet, his name is Leon. He's middle-aged, probably in his late 40s, and maybe early 50s. Who knows? Older than me, and he hit. We have our little name tags on, and I say, "Man, that name looks familiar. Who is this guy?" And so we get to talk, and we talk, and I tell him a little bit. Yeah, I was a Presbyterian pastor. He's like, "Really?" And he said, "What seminary did you go to?" And I said, "I went to Trinity Evangelical." And he says, "Oh." He's like, "I have a friend who went to Gordon Conwell." And I said, "Really?" And we talk more, and then his friend is Scott Hahn.
And, wow.
And I'm like, who are you? And then his name registers. This is the co-editor of the book I was reading the night before.
Wow.
On Marian theology. No joke. Can't make it up. Leon Supernaut. And it just like, oh my gosh. Like, how in the world is this possible? So Leon became my sponsor into the Catholic Church, which is completely fitting. And RCA was a success.
That's great.
Well, connected to your initial question, Leon is deeply networked into the realm of just anything in terms of all over the country, really. And knowing my background and knowing how I thought and knowing my professional caliber of speaking and just teaching, he introduced me to an organization called School of Faith, a couple of guys, Troy Hinkle and Mike Scherschlicht. And eventually that relationship blossomed into them inviting me on to staff there. And so it was a huge gamble on their part, tremendous grace on their part to invite me in. And there was a year-long kind of like a courtship process. They wanted to make sure that what they were getting into. And then after that year, they kind of embraced me in full time. So the interesting thing is, though, that I had a lot to learn. And both Mike and Troy in particular, we met several times and read through the catechism, and we just sat and I just asked questions and we just talked through the catechism. And then I was also teaching the catechism to faculty. So it was catechesis by fire, which was really the best possible way to learn. So it was just a fantastic relationship there for 5 years.
Wow. There's part of me that is like disappointed in RCA because a lot of people don't find that special blessing that you did, when you walked in there, But then there's part of me that's like very happy with the current Catholic RCIA because it is just so ordinary. I have a spiritual director and he's now, quite advanced in age, but he tells the story that when he was discerning joining the monastery, that the vocation director at the monastery literally fell asleep in his chair while they were talking. because he'd been like working out in the fields at the monastery and like couldn't stay awake while he was talking to him. And he said that when the vocation director fell asleep, he knew he was going to join. like this is keeping it real at some level. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing hoity-toity going on here. But okay, so wow. So now you're out on your own. You're working as a carpenter, and you started your own ministry called Grounded Catholic. Can you explain that?
Yeah. I mean, yes and no. It's an interesting thing. So I was laid off from School of Faith right before COVID, or right in the midst of, as COVID started, and that's a whole nother thing. I was very sad about that because I felt like it was a good relationship. Nevertheless, 2 weeks later, my dad, who is a carpenter and runs a remote restoration business, fell off a scaffolding and broke his hip, or broke his arm and his back. And he's like, "Hey, I actually need some help." So I didn't have a job, and it was entering into summer. And hey, all right, I'll help you for at least 8 weeks to 10 weeks until he can get, back on his feet. And that turned into now 3 years. But during this time, my wife and I, that's a whole nother story that we need to talk about at some point. But my wife, Carrie, and I, we knew we wanted to be involved in ministry at some capacity. And we had been praying about that for a long time. And just decided to kind of do carpentry and just wait on God. So I applied for a director role at a local organization in Kansas City and made it to, the final round and didn't get the job. And then I was invited by a pastor of St. Lawrence Center at KU to apply for a catechesis, the head of catechesis or whatever it is, faith formation job, and applied and made it to the final two, didn't get the job. And so I was just like, well, God, do you want me in ministry or not? And this whole time, I did not want to do nonprofit. I did not want to start my own nonprofit. I just, for some reason, was just against it. And then I had a very random thing happen. A nun texted me, who I had I was acquaintances with, not friends with, but she was at St. Lawrence Center. And she called me and she says, "Hey, Chad, I have something that I need to share with you. Can I come to your house and share it with you?" Okay, well, if a nun says that, yeah, okay, sure, come on over. So she drives.
Were you worried that, like, if someone called me with that, instead of them giving me like a good word or something, I would be worried that there's a scandal?
Yeah, I mean, it could be, like Samuel with David. Who knows? Like, what did I do? Oh, crap. I'm doing a quick examination of conscience right there on the spot. But anyway, she drives over, and I have no idea what she's going to say. She walks in, we make small talk for a little bit, and then she just gets straight to the point, and she says something like, in her Italian accent, "My dad is a carpenter, and my brother is a carpenter, and I have nothing against carpentry. You should not be a carpenter. You have tremendous gifts, blah, 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 this, and you, there's such a thing as working under the church, submission to the church, and there's such a thing as, like a nonprofit work." And she said, "I think you need to start something." And that was it. Like nothing deeper than that, nothing, but it was an impression on her heart. She said it wasn't a vision. This isn't prophecy. This is just something that I've been praying for, and you need to know what I've been praying. And so I talked to Carrie that night, and she was gung ho about starting this nonprofit. And so we kind of started it, and we still don't really know. We still don't know what it is to this day. I mean, it exists, and we have some ideas initially of what we want it to be, but we don't know what God wants. So we just exist right now.
So you're kind of still in the cocoon phase of this ministry.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I want to say shout out to your wife, Carrie. because like she was actually on our channel before the Simpleton podcast like 10 years ago. And she also had a great story about starting multiple ministries that were successful and still kind of exist even today. You know, so that's cool. And it's cool that you guys are working on this.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Carrie, for the audience who doesn't know, Carrie, my wife, Carrie Kafka, her last name is Pirotte now, but she started City on a Hill, which is a thriving young adult community in Kansas City. And that was started, I don't know, 15 years ago, 12 years ago, something like that. And we knew each other. Interestingly, she's a part of my conversion too. We met each other at Kansas State in Navigators. She was a part of Navigators, and really, she was Catholic. And really, for the first time in my life, I had met a Catholic that was, in my opinion, like, you know, clearly ardent in her faith and genuine and like has an evangelical spirit, you know. All the stereotypes, whatever, out back then. And I was just completely perplexed and like attracted and like, who is this girl? And so she was in many ways the catalyst of just at least being open to, oh, Catholics can be Christian. I mean, that sounds completely crazy that I'd say that or think that, but that's what I thought. And she, and you know, I wanted to ask her out at the time, even in college, but I was like, well, she's Catholic. I can't do that.
That's good.
So 15 years later, somehow fortuitously, God's providence, we were both single and Facebook friends, and I reached out to her, and that's a whole nother journey, but she was in many ways a redemptress for my life.
You know, this friend I mentioned, I'm changing the subject on you. I'm sorry, Chad, but
that's fine. That's totally fine.
This friend I mentioned, he didn't want to be a member of a church that was founded in 1982. I talked to him again a couple years ago, and now he's a member of kind of a high church Anglican. Okay. You know?
Yeah.
So it's like he's gotten Catholic adjacent, like in this whole like process, right? And I go, oh man, I know some members of that church, and they just converted to Catholicism, right? And he goes, and he just on the phone goes, yeah, some people just take it too far. But all right. So I have a question about Protestantism that I feel like you're way more qualified to inform than most, you know, or I don't know, than me. But when do you think this kind of evangelical arm of Protestantism like really took off? Is it like a 19th century thing, like in the 1800s it took off?
Yeah, I mean, the evangelical historians would say during the First and Second Great Awakenings. So
what are the dates of that?
Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield, I want to say late 1700s, early 1800s for the First Great Awakening, I think. Don't quote me on that. And then the Second Great Awakening, I want to say was like in the 1870s or 1880s, something like that. Again, don't quote me on that, but it's pre-1900 for sure.
Right. So here's a theory I have, and I want you to comment on. So I think that the Industrial Revolution is a bigger deal than any of us like think it is.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Meaning like it took us, 300,000 years to get to 500 million or 1 billion people. And then in 200 years, we got to 8 billion. Right. Yeah. And everything's moving so much faster, not just technology, but I think even like the exchange of ideas, moral discussions and things like this are just rapidly changing, right? And I found a quote in the Compendium on Social Doctrine where the church said that it was actually designed for like almost an agrarian society. Like with its seasons and things like this. And that the reason for the social doctrine was kind of because of the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I have this idea and this curiosity whether or not the reason why evangelical Protestantism, particularly as a Western thing, because that's where the Industrial Revolution happened, took off is because, do you know what it means to like hot rod a car? Like if we were to take an old like Cadillac and hot rod it, we'd like take all the leather out of it, we'd like take the stereo out of it because you don't need that for speed. You know what I mean? We just like strip that thing down just so it's built for speed, right? And maybe even speed in a straight line. You know what I mean? Like a dragster, right?
Yeah.
And I have this curiosity if like evangelical Protestantism is like hot-rodded Christianity. And that maybe it's really good as that. And in a sense, it's like that Christianity, which as the world was changing so fast, post-industrial revolution, it didn't have anything holding it back. It didn't have the traditions that looked outdated. It didn't have anything. It was like, let me get you the basic message really hard and quick and fast, right?
Right.
Does that resonate as like a okay theory to you, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah. I think the idea and the direction of the idea is correct. I don't know if I would use that exact allegory or simile or parallel or whatever, but I'm trying to think of something that I would think of in terms of how I would explain it. Yeah, I mean, there's certainly this. Here, the evangelical spirit is this: there are a number of people that are living a life, and they need Jesus. You know, they need to experience and encounter Jesus. And what's the best way that we can make that happen? Not just the best way, like not the deepest way that we can make that happen, but what is the most efficient way, the most industrial way, so to speak, the assembly line way of making that happen. And so in many ways, you're right. They are thinking industrially. They are thinking efficiently and effectively, not necessarily, they're trying to eliminate what is seen as cumbersome and get to the heart of the Christian message, which is you need to connect with Jesus. But the church, the Catholic Church, sometimes just gets in the way of that. It creates obstructions and hula hoops and whatnot, even, you know, however you view that. And so they want to streamline it in a way that.
I love the word streamline, right?
Yeah.
I want to save my car analogy at some level, because what's also true is that it is very efficient, right? But if you're going to ride in a car for a long time, you don't want it to just be efficient.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
You want the leather interior, you want the radio, you want all the extras, you know?
Right.
But like, if you just got to learn how to drive, or you just got to get, I think the way you put it's right. And it's what you and I kind of talked about this in passing at your house. It's that like, it's hard for Catholicism to meet that drug addict on the street and to give him just the essential and to get that first relationship with Christ, like plugged in, you know, that will be totally transformative. You know, you can't sell that guy a Cadillac. You know what I mean? You gotta get that streamlined version in there. But I also wonder if this is the logic of Vatican II, right? Like the same way that the Protestant world kind of discovered a streamlined version that was necessary for this new fast changing world. You know, if there was a sense that the church, you know, 150 years after the Industrial Revolution's like, look, we have to get the basics more clear, or we have to, you know, and that this was part of this idea that we'll be better positioned to deal with this like fast changing world.
Yeah. Are you asking whether I agree with that?
I guess so.
Or you just,
I'm kind of, this is my new like speculative theory, you know, and I don't know. It's half baked.
I agree with the heart of Vatican II, 100%. And that heart, the heart that I understand it to be, is this approach that we have an ocean of people in our church that are just going through the motions, and we're seeing a decline. I mean, again, the Latin community wouldn't like the statistic, but there's a decline in ordinations happening way prior to Vatican II in Europe. In the 1950s, late 1940s, right after World War II, essentially, we're starting to see a decline. And Vatican II is seeing this decline in faith, and they're saying something is amiss, and we need to take a deep, long look within and see if we can change something without changing the core of who we are. And of course, as they changed the mass, which many people would argue is the core of who they are, people would say they're changing their identity altogether. But I would argue that what they did was it had a good intention, and I still think we haven't seen yet the repercussions of Vatican II in many ways. I mean, we're only 50 years away, so let's wait another 200 years and see. Yeah,
I've had the sense that like John Henry Newman, like, you know, the way you tell your story of conversion, if you look at John Henry Newman, it's almost like he converts by reading the church fathers and realizing that they were basically Catholic, you know what I mean? And in a way that he couldn't reconcile with his Protestant church, right? Yeah. And then when he comes into the church as a priest and later a cardinal and everything, I feel like there's a lot of, like, he's rooted in those church fathers, and in a way the church itself had left the fathers a little bit. Like we had kind of, I think we started separating in a sense. And it's not wrong that we separated. It's kind of like, I think around Thomas Aquinas, we kind of like built everything from him on, as opposed to going back to the year 500 or 400, right? Yeah. And a lot of accidentals get glued on, which are fine. Like, I mean, you could argue that any individual accidental that got glued on was like beautiful and fine and edifying and great, right? But there was so much that we're still sorting out which ones we should be keeping or not. But I think it also made the church a behemoth that couldn't deal with how fast things are changing now. Mm-hmm. You know, and I don't think they're all going to change for the bad. I'm kind of the mind that it's just fast. It's not bad. Like we're going to like figure out this transgender thing, and a lot of people are going to have said a lot of wrong things about it, you know, by the end, you know, that the truth will ultimately win, but it's a way more like competitive or aggressive marketplace of ideas than it used to be. Yeah. You know? So I don't know. Yeah, that's all a little bit half-baked too. I have one other change of subject for you, Chad. Have you heard this, like, young people talk about being a Chad?
No, I haven't. But is it kind of like a Karen?
No, it's the opposite, dude. And you're really a Chad. Yeah. No, to be a Chad is like the dude who like changes the other guy's tire and like doesn't complain. Okay. And it's like the manly man. You haven't heard this? Dude, all right, look it up after this. You will see, you know, Zoomer and Millennial podcast after podcast. Chad is like the dude you wish you were.
Huh, interesting. Well, that's a compliment, I guess.
Well, it is. Yeah. But you also, as a carpenter, you know, you embody, and a carpenter, a dad, and everything like this. You just embody a chat being. You are the meme. You're living the meme.
Well, I guess that's cool.
Well, it's a good meme, so it is cool. But yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. So I was born in 1980, and I know that almost every Chad that I know is born between like 1975 and 1982. You know, something. So around there, it's like a 7-year period of Chad was the cool name somehow. And, you know, that era, like I'm considered 1980 era, I forget what I'm at. I'm not Generation X, but I'm the bridge, the gap era between kind of the old school, you know, no technology to having internet. I grew up with, like in high school, we had the internet introduced, and then I didn't have a cell phone until I was like 25, you know, so it's just weird to think about. But I'm the bridge. So maybe the Chad is kind of that cool guy that, knew how to change a tire, but also can talk on the phone and the internet.
Maybe you have pointed it out. Maybe it's that they were all born in that period. You know, maybe that's why they're the Chads. Yeah. It's kind of like, I feel like the female equivalent would be Jennifer. There's no more Jennifers around, you know?
Yeah, lots of Jennifers back in the 1970s and 80s.
Right. So, all right. Well, good talking to you, man. Anything else you want to plug or talk about?
No, I would just say, first of all, thank you for your time. I tremendously appreciate, we didn't talk about this at all, and we don't have to. I have no idea what time you have, but I tremendously appreciate your guys' heart for the poor And that's a whole nother issue, a whole nother conversation we could talk about in the Catholic Church. Because on paper we endorse it, but I don't see a lot of action endorsing that in the Catholic culture, I should say. Anyway, I wholeheartedly embrace your guys' support and what you do, and just wish you the best in success. Thank you for your call.
I'd like to get you and your family out for a Simple House event sometime.
Yeah. So. All right. And I'll give a plug. Hey, one quick, groundedcatholic.com is my organization. For what it's worth, if anyone's interested, I have a number of articles that I've written and some events that are posted on there. So if you want to find out more about who I am and groundedcatholic.com, go ahead and go there.
I love the name Grounded Catholic, and I kind of disagree with the nun. I kind of hope you remain a carpenter at least half-time. Something about that is grounded,
I firmly agree, and God has not opened the doors to future, so we'll see. We'll see what he has in store.
Thank you for listening to the Simpleton Podcast. Like, subscribe, comment, and Laura will be back soon. Bye.